All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. The day has finally come as Jim Boeheim will wake up tomorrow morning and no longer be the head basketball coach at Syracuse University. Following today's 77-74 loss to Wake Forest in the second round of the NCAA tournament, the school announced that Boeheim would be replaced by one of his former players in Adrian Autry. Now, in 47 years at Syracuse, Boeheim turned the Orange, then the Orange Men, into a national power with 35 trips to the NCAA tournament, five Final Fours, and one historic and epic national championship that came 20 years ago. Now, over that stretch, Boeheim sent a litany of players to the NBA, which included Carmelo Anthony, Derek Coleman, Pearl Washington, and Billy Owens, just to name a few. And when you think about Syracuse basketball, you have to think about the famed 2-3 zone. Now, Boeheim was not the only coach to use the 2-3 zone, and you have coaches in today's current game that use forms of the 2-3 zone. But when I think about the 2-3 zone at its best, Boeheim and former Temple head coach John Chaney, they did a tremendous job in coaching the zone. And it's something where, like anything else, you have to be patient with it, you have to teach with it. And, from an outsider's perspective, people might look at a zone and think, okay, the guys are being lazy. No, no, no. There's a lot of movement, there's a lot of focus. And it's a lot of luring the opposing offense into lanes and into potential shots that simply aren't there. And at times, especially when Syracuse had those deep NCAA tournament runs under Boeheim, the zone always tended to be a problem for their opponents because in the NCAA tournament, more often than not, you're facing a team from a different conference. And in some cases, some of these kids have never faced the zone. So it just simply throws them off. And when Syracuse's zone was at its best, they had length on the wings of that zone. And of course, in 2003, when they won the national championship, you had Akeem Warwick as a wing player on that zone, 6'8" player with the wingspan of a 7-footer. And then, of course, the epic block at the end of the championship game against Kansas that year is a big reason why that Syracuse was able to win their one and only national championship. Now you think about Syracuse basketball, and it was part of the fabric of the original Big East Conference, and you think about the heyday of the Big East, and I'm talking about the 1980s, and what made the original Big East were the rivalries. Of course, the coaches, a lot of those coaches had personalities, but the rivalries as well. And you think about Syracuse's battles during that era, both with Georgetown and St. John's, and what it meant to build that basketball conference. And, you just think about the legendary coaches that came from that conference during that era. Rolly Massimino at Villanova, John Thompson II at Georgetown, Lou Carnesecca at St. John's, Jim Boeheim at Syracuse, Rick Pitino during his first run in the Big East as he was the head coach at Providence. And you think about Boeheim, he is the last of the original Big East coaches. And again, you just think about what he meant to the Big East, what Syracuse meant to the Big East, and then, of course, what he has meant to college basketball as a whole. And Boeheim talked about this when Syracuse agreed to leave the Big East in favor of the ACC, and he was on board with it. Go back more than 10 years ago, didn't like it, and he thought it wasn't the best idea in in the purpose of the school, but obviously as an employee of Syracuse University, he's got to fall in line. We all know that these moves in regards to realignment in college sports, it's all about chasing the football dollar. And that's why a school like Syracuse left the Big East in favor of the ACC. And just like Boston College, just like Pitt in the ACC, basketball wise, Syracuse has been a fish out of water. With the exception of Syracuse's first year in the ACC when they went 28-6. They have lost at least 10 games every year. They did have a Final Four run back in 2016, but Syracuse did that as a 10 seed. So that just gives you an idea of where the Cuse program was when they left the Big East. And it's just, on the other end of the spectrum because you think about it for so many years, you expected Syracuse to be a 5 seed, a 4 seed, a 3 seed, a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. And then part of it with them being a fish out of water, just like it was or has been for Pitt, just like it has been for Boston College, they're no longer getting the local kids from the Northeast like they once did. Part of that allure was Madison Square Garden for the Big East tournament. Part of that allure was coming back to Madison Square Garden in the regular season to face St. John's, playing the local kids from that area. And you think about Syracuse's success for the most part under Jim Boeheim. They got the kids from the Maryland area, from the Philadelphia area, from New York City, from upstate New York, and New England as well. And, with the exception of maybe a Derek Coleman, most of their talented players came from Pennsylvania, came from New York City or the New York City area, came from Maryland. A guy like Carmelo Anthony coming from the Baltimore area, Billy Owens from Pennsylvania, Hakeem Warwick from Philadelphia, Pearl Washington from Brooklyn, New York, and Boys and Girls High School. That was the fabric of Syracuse basketball. That was the fabric of the original Big East as far as keeping the local kids home. And of course, in the ACC, when you're just instead of being a big fish in a small pond, you're a small fish in a big pond. It simply has not worked out for this historic program. Now, between the NIL and other changes to collegiate athletics, you could honestly see the writing on the wall for the past couple of years, unfortunately for Boeheim, that his time was coming to an end. And in the past several years, we've seen some of the giants from the college head coaching ranks call it a day. Coach K last year at Duke, Roy Williams a couple of years ago at North Carolina, Jay Wright last year at Villanova, and of course Boeheim is in that mix as well. You think about it, more than 1,000 wins. His connection to USA basketball. He's been so much to that university. He's been there for 47 years as their head coach. You think not just as a head coach, he was an assistant before that. And then, of course, he played basketball at Syracuse. Once upon a time, he was a walk on. And by the time that his career playing wise was over at Syracuse, he was a captain along with Hall of Famer Dave Bing. So that just gives you an idea of what Jim Boeheim has meant to that program. And you think about iconic figures in the history of Syracuse athletics. One guy that comes to mind very quickly, of course, is the legendary Jim Brown, not just for what he did as a football player, but also as a lacrosse player as well. And then, of course, Jim Boeheim is definitely in that mix as well. So if you look at Adrian Autry, and of course, Syracuse stayed within their family, like a lot of programs do. And Adrian Autry, he played for Jim Boeheim for 4 years. He knows the ins and outs of the Syracuse program. And then he's been on Boeheim's staff since 2011. And, it's going to be interesting to see how Adrian Autry is able to leave his impact on the Syracuse program. And he definitely has big shoes to fill. But for me, things will never be the same for Syracuse basketball because it's one of those where when you think about Syracuse basketball, you're always going to think about Jim Boeheim. And I think about Roy Williams' time at North Carolina. And Roy Williams had tremendous success at Chapel Hill. But when you think about North Carolina's basketball program from a coaching perspective, you think about the legendary Dean Smith. For any head coach that has any success at UCLA, they're still not going to be John Wooden. I know John Shire has gotten off to a solid start in his first year at Duke, but you still think about the legendary Coach K. For any head coach at UConn, you think about Jim Calhoun, and I could go right down the list with this. But this is a type of program. This is the type of legacy, that Jim Boeheim has definitely left his program with. And you think about again what he meant to the Big East, and he saw a lot during his years with the Big East. He saw the heyday of the '80s. The Big East tapered off a little bit in the early '90s, and then the Big East came back strong in the mid to late '90s. And it started with the success of Jim Calhoun in Connecticut, but then after having so much success as a conference in the 1980s with Georgetown making three trips to the Final Four, Syracuse making a trip, Providence making a trip, Seton Hall making a trip, St. John's making a trip. Things had fallen off until Syracuse got there in 1996. And then, of course, Connecticut got there in 99 and they won the national championship. And then Syracuse and UConn went back to back in 2003 and 2004. But nonetheless, Jim Boeheim is not just the fabric of Syracuse basketball. He's also the fabric of the Big East, and he's a big reason why the Big East tournament, even though things have changed in the conference, it still continues to be played at Madison Square Garden. So for Adrian Autry, I think that the powers that be at Syracuse are going to give him every single opportunity to succeed, every single opportunity to shape the program in his image, but he has to find a way to leave his mark on the program. And by doing that, he needs to find out what the identity of this Syracuse program is going to be. Can they get back to the point of getting star players to play there like they once did? When Pearl Washington went to Syracuse, that was a big deal. When Derek Coleman went to Syracuse, that was a big deal. When Carmelo Anthony went to Syracuse, that was a big deal. We haven't seen those type of kids go to Syracuse in a long time, and it's going to be very interesting to see if Adrian Autry can do that. Now, of course, for some people in the media, I'm sure that, Jim Boeheim, and I'm not even going to sugarcoat this, he's ruffled some feathers over the years. And of course, he kind of ruffled some feathers on the way out, but it kind of like in the Frank Sinatra song, you know what? He did things his way. So that's just the nature of the beast. But at the end of the day, it's farewell to a basketball legend, farewell to a basketball icon. And whether you liked him or not, Syracuse basketball will never be the same without Jim Boeheim. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. Now you can check it out. Drop a line and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin. I am signing off, saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.